Who you attract versus who you are attracted to. Who you attract. It is very common for people who have gotten out of a narcissistic abusive relationship to feel that they are continuing to attract all of the wrong people, especially if more people with problematic behavior seem to keep showing up. They might start reading up on how abusive people pick their targets, and they might even work towards dressing differently, smiling less, walking with their shoulders back, and so on. However, who we attract is something that is largely outside of our control, because we all attract a wide range of people. Not to mention that different predators prey on different types of people for different types of reasons. Some go after quiet, pleasant, agreeable people because they are easy to dominate, and some go after confident and aggressive people because they are a challenge, or because they might have more money or social status. Some of the people you will attract, as friends, co-workers, or partners, most likely are normal, decent people. Some are highly problematic, and some fall somewhere in between. Just because we attract certain people into our lives doesn't mean that we need to let them in, or keep them in our lives once we realize that their behavior is problematic. Emotional manipulators are often master manipulators, and the ones that are really good can be difficult to spot in general, let alone right away. You don't need to twist yourself into an emotional pretzel trying to change your appearance or how you present yourself. All any of us can do is to go slow. Only give another person our trust that is earned, which happens over months, not days or hours, and really get to know a person before we get emotionally invested in them. Because 10% of the people out there are really destructive or dangerous. 10% are great. And of those 10% great people, only 1% will be your kind of people. The other 80% of people out there fall somewhere in between. The only way to tell who is to give the dynamic enough time for a person's true colors to surface, and to give yourself enough emotional distance in order to see their true colors clearly. Perhaps the biggest part of steering clear of people with problematic behavior is to realize that you can break up with someone or distance yourself from a person for any reason whatsoever. You don't need to justify, argue, defend, or explain yourself. Having a feeling that something is off or feeling like you aren't ready to date are both very valid reasons to call things off. Stating what we need and not feeling bad, wrong, or guilty about it is something that those of us who are learning to develop healthy boundaries often struggle with. We often feel the need to make absolutely certain this person is cheating, stealing, abusive, or otherwise dangerous or destructive before we leave. And that's where we tend to go wrong. You've seen this movie before. You don't need to sit through it to the end to know you don't like it. You don't need to wait until the bitter end to have the validation that the end is, in fact, bitter. It's okay to get up and walk out. Yes, other people may be annoyed. Yes, other people may tell you you need to date again, or that you're being too picky or hypervigilant, and that's okay. Let them be annoyed or have their opinion. This is your life, and they don't get to decide what you do or don't do. It's okay to do what you need to do to feel safe and sane, even if very few people around you agree. Who you are attracted to. Who you are attracted to, and more importantly, who you allow to stay in your life, is more within your control. And again, while we may also find ourselves attracted to a wide range of people, some great and some highly problematic, just because we are attracted to them doesn't mean we need to befriend them or date them. This is where examining our vulnerabilities comes into play. It can be really hard to walk away from problematic people if we have an empty bucket as far as getting some sort of basic need met, whether that need is safety, security, or significance. Meaning, if we are concerned about money, housing, transportation, food, all basic safety and security needs, or if we are feeling lonely or unloved or unimportant, all basic significance needs, then odds are we will not make decisions that are in our highest and best interest, but rather we will make decisions based around getting these needs met. We may move in with a creepy person we met on the internet just because they had a cheap room for rent, or we may fall for someone who is love-bombing us even though we aren't even physically attracted to them. This is because many of our decisions and behaviors aren't made consciously. They are made at a deeper subconscious level, and all of our default behavior is an attempt to get our needs met in the quickest way possible. The emptier the bucket, the more of a scramble we will be in to fill it, and odds are we don't even realize we are in a scramble, or that we are making poor decisions. It's hard for any of us to think straight if we have a basic need that's been unmet for any length of time. Have you ever heard of the advice that it's a good idea to not make a major life change for at least a year after a major life event, such as a divorce or death? The reason this advice is given is because the odds of a person making some impulsive bad decisions is really high. But when a person is caught up in the scramble of getting their needs met, they have a really hard time seeing that their decision is impulsive and not founded on good judgment. If anything, decisions made during this time often feel so incredibly right when they are so incredibly wrong, which is why these decisions at this time can be so problematic. If you find yourself reliving a pattern of relationships or behaviors in general that are causing you hurt or heartache, it's time to slow down and examine what could be driving this behavior. This is not to say that being abused or exploited is your fault. It's not. This is to say that when there is a pattern of similar people that start showing up in your lives, This is to say that when there is a pattern of similar people that start showing up in your life, that there is also something subconsciously going on there that is worth exploring. It's really important for us to examine our buckets and see which ones need filling so we don't keep finding ourselves in problematic situations or with problematic people time and again. Because when our buckets are empty for a prolonged period of time, they become vulnerable. And narcissistic people exploit vulnerabilities in others to get what they want. It's the lonely widow, or widower, who gets caught up in the online dating scam and loses their life savings. It's the child whose parents aren't around who gets caught up in a gang. It's the person who recently went through a divorce, or who felt ignored or unloved as a child, who falls for the love bombing and moves in with their perfect partner a few months later, only to find out that they cheat, lie, manipulate, steal, abuse, and so on. I know this may feel like victim blaming, but please believe me, that is not my intention. I've been in more than my fair share of toxic relationships, and friendships too, and these buckets aren't the only piece in the puzzle. Becoming familiar with what manipulative and abusive behavior is and how it feels is another big piece in the puzzle. It's the same with online scams. When they first began happening, people were falling for them right and left. Now that more people know about them, they don't fall for them as easily. Having vulnerabilities is a part of being human, and we will always have them, and they will be forever changing as we go through life. We can't get rid of our vulnerabilities, nor would we want to, as they are one of the main ways that we bond in healthy ways with others. But it is important for us to be aware of our vulnerabilities as much as possible, as we run the risk of them being exploited otherwise. Outside of identifying our vulnerabilities and being familiar with what manipulative and abusive behavior is, the other big thing we can do is make sure we have healthy boundaries and deal-breaker behavior, and make sure that our choices in people and situations are filtered through those boundaries and standards. This is easier said than done. I encourage you to take some time and write out not only a list of qualities that you are looking for in people in your life, but also how you've felt around the problematic people in your life, as well as to examine if all of those friendships or relationships started off in a similar way, because usually they do. The more you can spot how your vulnerabilities have been exploited, the less likely you are to have that happen in the future. Healthy boundaries and having deal-breaker behavior will get the wrong people out of your life, and they take practice. Be kind to yourself during this process, as it's a lot like learning to ride a bike. Odds are you will fall and get scraped up, but it's part of learning. Keep at it and you'll get the hang of it. News story. I had an abusive childhood, and that pattern of abuse continually repeated itself in my adult life. I couldn't figure out what it was about me that seemed to attract such abusive people. I tried changing the clothes I wore, smiling less, trying to be nicer, and forever trying to keep the peace. And that worked to an extent, but it was exhausting, and I felt like I was forever walking on eggshells just trying to keep peace in my life. It wasn't until I started going to Codependence Anonymous, CODA, meetings that I really learned about healthy boundaries, and that it wasn't so much who I attracted, but how long I kept the wrong people in my life. I've since learned to be assertive, or if need be, to leave a friendship or a relationship once I began to be mistreated. I don't waste my time on all the wrong people hoping they'll change. I've taken my power back and realized that life is too short to be around toxic people. Of course, my whole family thinks I'm the mean and unreasonable one because I won't have anything to do with my abusive mother, but that's okay. They don't need to be okay with my decision. Faye. Commitment versus codependence. Commitment. Commitment is a conscious dedication, a voluntary obligation to a relationship, to be inclusive of the other person's needs, desires, and viewpoint, because the mutual bond is your priority and it is mutually rewarding. You expect the other person to feel the same way, and most of life's challenges are met together, agreeing to stand by each other's side through the highs and lows of life together. Some of the normal highs and lows of life include starting or ending careers, sickness or health, financial ups and downs, raising children, moving, exploring new hobbies, learning how to make time work on the new relationship. Learning how to make time to work on the new relationship, navigating boundaries with extended family, and overall learning to work together as a team. Codependence. Codependence is beyond a healthy commitment. It is a state of being dependent on another person for more than just a mutual bond, but for your very sense of self. It feels like you need that person to exist, and without them you can't exist. That may sound romantic, but regardless of what the movies and media teach about love, it's not. At the most basic level, the need to please them or earn their attention or approval comes from a place of, I don't know what I'd do without them, or from the fear that if we don't become what they want us to be, that they will abandon us. To live like this is a life full of walking on eggshells and never fully being ourselves, or never getting to the point where we even know who we are, because we spend our lives sacrificing our wants and needs, our identity, to please someone else. The need also blinds you to whether the other person feels the same way, or is even capable of providing what you want. It's the nature of this kind of need that other people can't fulfill it entirely, because it's something within ourselves. Unlike a commitment, codependence is a one-sided dynamic in which one partner tends to have a lot of destructive behavior, and the other clings to them and to the relationship for dear life, while they are being dragged through hell and hoping that one day things will get better. This is not a healthy commitment. This is codependency. There is no value in being committed to someone whose behavior is destroying you. Many people who are codependent don't realize it, and they often don't realize that their partner has been manipulating them. They often think of their behavior as being caring, compassionate, and concerned, and they often value commitment at all costs. They also tend to struggle with being able to tell the difference between a healthy relationship and an abusive relationship. They tend to not have deal-breaker behavior, and instead believe that given enough love, understanding, patience, therapy, religion, or rehab, that this problematic person can change. Codependency tends to come out in three main ways: clingy, caretaking, or controlling. The clingy type of codependent behavior is full of people-pleasing and doormat types of behavior. It's where a codependent person has a hard time walking away from problematic people or situations and stays until things get so bad that they are forced to leave or until their partner leaves them. The caretaking and coddling type of codependent behavior is full of justifying and enabling problematic behavior. being easily manipulated into thinking that this problematic adult doesn't understand the basics of adult behavior and that they are responsible for teaching them. It's also putting everyone else's wants and needs ahead of our own, feeling like a perpetual parent or therapist to their partner or friends, and having weak, poor, or non-existent boundaries. The controlling type of codependent behavior is full of acting like a parental figure, being overly involved, making threats to leave, being passive-aggressive, or continually trying to fix someone's problematic behavior instead of walking away from people who continue to hurt them. Many people who find themselves in a relationship with a difficult, abusive, or narcissistic person will have their commitment tested and, more than likely, their fears of abandonment triggered. If you already have an emotional need for validation, and most of us do, and are involved with someone who can't regulate their emotions or self-esteem, and who oscillates between pumping up your ego and then devaluing it, it is very common to double down on your commitment. Your instinct tells you that if you can just try harder, if you give them all your love, you'll finally make that connection with them. But this is often an attempt of desperation to hang on to the other person because your self-worth is tied to them. Losing them implies losing yourself. More often than not, this extra effort does not result in stronger bonding or validation because the other person doesn't have the same capacity or ability to form a mutual bond. If they did, you likely wouldn't feel that desperate need. And so you can make a rational decision to break your conscious commitment and get out. However, you may still feel codependently attached. You may still have a deep emotional need for that person, for your sense of self, and feel as if you can't exist without them. This is an exceptionally difficult time because part of you knows you have to let go for your sanity, and part of you won't let go for fear of losing yourself. Many people refer to this contradictory feeling as cognitive dissonance. Perhaps a more accurate term would be emotional dissonance. For most, the underlying need keeping you in the unhealthy attachment is actually a childhood or childlike fear of abandonment. If you can realize that you don't need this toxic person the way you needed a parent, the attachment will loosen its grip on you. With awareness of this distinction between commitment and codependence in oneself, it is equally important to learn to evaluate what drives attachment, or lack of attachment, for the other person, for all the people you have relationships with, by their pattern of behavior over time. All of us have instincts and needs we are unaware of, some triggered more than others. This is why awareness is so important, not only of others, but of our own emotional drives. It's important to acknowledge that there is an aspect or degree of codependence that is part of our instinct to form strong bonds. We have a better chance of survival by sticking together, even when things are difficult, and not just giving up at the first sign of imperfection. However, we can't let any single emotional drive dictate our behavior. We must regulate all of our emotions, take into account all factors, including what we observe about other people, their behavior and abilities, and include our emotions and rational observations in our decisions about attachment. News story. I thought that marriage was forever. I took vows and I took them seriously. I thought that everything could be worked out, even his lying, cheating, and abusing. The last time I went back, a friend told me that I really needed to work on my codependency issues. I had no idea what she was talking about and was really offended. I didn't see how me being supportive and staying committed was bad or wrong. I began reading about codependency online, and a lot of things began to make sense. I never thought of myself as codependent, but I guess I also never thought I was in an abusive and exploitative relationship either. The more I read about boundaries and deal breakers, the more I saw where I had been going wrong for so many years. I had some really skewed beliefs about what love towards myself and others looked like. I'm not sure if that necessarily makes me codependent, but it did for sure mean that my boundaries needed work, and that I had been very naive about other people and how relationships worked. Andrea. News story. I always thought of a codependent person being female, and because I was a guy, I never thought the term could apply to me. In addition, I was independent, had no problem being single, and made my own money, and had my own house. However, what was me was that I had a pattern of intense and toxic relationships with women. I realized that while I was independent, level-headed, and strong in these other ways, when it came to relationships, I had a pattern of falling quick and hard for charming women who were quick to want to make me their whole world. Each time this happened, I felt so loved. But it was more than that. It was like I'd been lost in a hot desert and they were this cold ice water that I couldn't get enough of. Each time I always thought that this woman was the one, and each time they'd end up hiding major things from me, lying, cheating, or were just flat out controlling and dramatic, pretty much threatening that if I didn't make them my whole world, that they'd leave. My last relationship lasted 4 years, and it was 4 years of an intense emotional roller coaster, and my friends and I used to joke that I was in an abusive relationship. And actually, knowing what I know now, I was, but at the time I didn't realize it. I think it's because I was a guy, she was a woman, and she never hit me, but the elements of control were there. If I didn't give in to her, she would make my life a living hell. I'm embarrassed that I put up with her for as long as I did. I had tried leaving her before, but each time I felt this insane, clingy neediness, which felt like it was going to destroy me if I couldn't get her back, or at least talk to her. I felt like an addict chasing that next hit. She was all I could think about, and I couldn't imagine my life without her, even though life with her was awful a lot of the time. I started going to CODA meetings, Codependence Anonymous, and realized that I had a very similar pattern with my mother, who left when I was a kid. I'm not blaming her for my behavior, but now I can see where I got this skewed sense of what love and healthy behavior were from. Michael. News story. I would just like to comment that I still to this day struggle with the label of codependence. I don't feel like I fit the label, and then I resent it when it's applied. If anything, I feel I am more of a pathological optimist. My hope springs eternal from a well deep inside of me, and I cannot explain it any better than that. There simply was no shut-off valve for my hopefulness. The only way I ever ended any of these relationships was to deliberately and intentionally turn my back on my core being, and that core being is one who is eternally hopeful, and to deliberately and intentionally wrench the valve to the off position with all my might, and to force myself to just stop hoping. It was and remains one of the hardest things I have ever had to do in my life. It went directly against the grain of who I truly am at my core, and it is also because my hopefulness has served me extremely well in my professional life, and in my personal life in almost all of my interactions with most people, except, of course, with the disordered and the destructive. It is my very deep, bottomless well of hopefulness that keeps me going, and that keeps me being the solutions-oriented person that I am. I don't give up, and I don't stop searching for solutions, ever. That is simply not who I am. It is extremely difficult for me to ever put a puzzle down and admit there is no solution. I believe so strongly in myself and my problem-solving abilities that I simply cannot admit there is no solution. So, to summarize, in my opinion, it is dangerous to call a character trait that is generally and usually of tremendous value, and is one that usually brings so much joy and solutions and answers and profit and beauty and abundance to one's life, and make it sound like it is something bad. That is why I don't like the label codependency. I am, in some strange way, evenly matched up to and with the disordered. I am as intent and committed to making the relationship work as they are to being disruptive and destructive without concern for me or the relationship. Being determined or developing what I call true grit has gotten me far in life, but has been destructive as far as relationships go. I can tolerate an incredible amount of pain if I am doing it to reach a loftier, higher goal. I can simply shrug off injuries in order to reach a better final destination. I am easily able to delay gratification to reach a better place. I can wield incredible self-control and rule myself with an iron hand, and I have used these very traits to build a very successful life for myself. That is exactly how I want it to be, exactly where I want it to be, exactly how I want it to be, exactly where I want it to be, and I am as completely and totally independent and free of reliance on anyone else as I possibly can be. There is, with almost every rule, always also an exception to that rule, so I would have to say it like this. In general, a hopeful, optimistic nature and dedication and commitment to being problem-solving and solutions-oriented is a good character trait and is one that will serve you well throughout your life, except in interactions with the destructive and the disordered. In those cases, your stubbornness, dedication, hopefulness, optimism, and your commitment to finding solutions will be turned against you, and it will eventually cause you to implode in a most spectacularly devastating and destructive manner. The reason your true grit won't help is because they are not receptive to solutions, and finding solutions goes against their core being. Their goal is chaos, confusion, disruption, destruction. Lucy.